my life and something that I have been so fortunate to be involved with as the chair of the translation committee of Urantia Foundation. So I got this job maybe about, I guess 6 years ago. It seems like forever. And our goal really was to kind of think about how we were doing our translations and making sure that they were of the highest quality that they can be. And that's one thing I think Urantia Foundation wants to create in its identity, is that we are the producer of the highest quality translations. And it's really important to us because as multiple translations appear on the scene, you know, how does one differentiate between a translation that has gone through a very systematic process and others that have actually just been done by a single person? And I'm sure, as many of you can attest to in your countries, it is always a bit difficult when you have one single translator as the sole person who's working on that translation. And that's really important to us because what we try to do is work with teams. But the life of a translator is actually quite difficult and challenging. And what we ended up putting into place, which we hope is going to be very helpful to us, is a translation process that's based on love for the Urantia revelation. So the first thing we want to talk about is, where did our translation come from? And in 2006, we adopted a process from the ASTM, which is a standards movement, and they had a standard guide for quality assurance in translations. Now, it wasn't actually meant for the kind of translations we do. It's meant for more mechanical kinds of translations, but we looked at it, and what was really good about it was it identified the factors relevant to the quality of a language translation. So quality is the kind of centerpiece of our work as we move into the next 10 to 15 years. Using these standards, we created a 5-stage process for translating the Urantia book. As we examined our own translations, we realized that it took 40 or more years to complete the stages and create a quality translation according to this process. Well, this was totally amazing to us, because who thinks 40 years for a translation? I mean, we would have guessed 10, but when you end up going through the entire piece of the revisions and the copy editing and everything like that, it ended up that we felt that the 40-year timeline was kind of the mean. And those stages are, we'll go through them each in more detail, but first is preparation. And that's the 1 to 10 years, and that's when a kind of a culture is getting ready and thinking about the translation. Usually have a person emerges or several people emerge who really believe it's time to begin a translation in their language. Usually very motivated, as we know by our translators here today, to go ahead and pursue a translation in a language. That can often happen between 1 and 10 years, sometimes faster, sometimes slower. The appraising part of it then looks at, are we in a good state to be able to create that translation? And that can go for about 6 months to a year. We look at a variety of different factors. Now that we've been through the process with over 20 translations, we absolutely have a pretty good idea of when a translation may be difficult and when translations are going to move smoothly. So we take some time looking at the actual ability of the whole system to work with that translation. 9 to 10 years for translating. And those people here who have begun that journey know this is a very complex process. It takes so much devotion, so much of a commitment of time that 9 to 10 years now, when we look at it, we've had some that have lasted many more years, like the Greek. The Greek has been on the table for 20 years, but still, they're back on track. So a translation process It can take about 9 to 10 years. Then we go through what we call a maturing process, and this is kind of the opportunity for other readers to give feedback. Some people believe that a translation of the Urantia book should be perfect. And I'll say perfect, but not only perfect, but perfect the very first time. You know, the Revelators gave us their best translation. We have to remember that. Their best translation into the English language. And now you're asking someone to take their best translation and move it into another language that oftentimes doesn't have the language itself to express these concepts. You know, the English was chosen as the language because of its flexibility and ability to have terminology, and now we try to move that into another language. And maturing is when somebody says, and for most of you who are working with different countries, they probably go to you, well, what were they talking about when they used this term? Or why did they say this? The English is so clear. And that's kind of that 5 to 15-year period where the book itself is being read and the maturing process is happening, and we're seeing all of a sudden bubbling up these ideas about how we should revise it. And then the revision process, generally a 5 to 6 year period done by a team. But again, there is no normal for translations of the Urantia book because they're out of love, because they're so passionate about what they're doing. So it can take many years, it can take few years. But we encourage everybody, actually kind of require everybody to kind of go through this process. 40 years from now, we'll all be dead, but we will have a quality translation. So. Well, sometimes we may not have one, but the thought is we'll have one. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about those stages. So first, as we're preparing for the translation, which is about a 1 to 10 year period, as the English text of the Urantia book finds its way around the world, its teachings inspire readers to translate it into their own mother tongue. By the end of stage 1, a seed is planted and the conditions become ripe for growth. Phase 2, appraising the readiness for a specific translation. It is exceedingly difficult to present enlarged concepts and advanced truth in our endeavor to expand cosmic consciousness and enhance spiritual perception when we are restricted to the use of a circumscribed language of the realm. That's what they tell us about English. And imagine when that moves out to the restrictions of another language of a circumscribed realm. What must they have been thinking as they thought that that would globally happen, that the language would be there? During stage 2, the conditions to create a quality translation are assessed. And some of the things that we look for in order to those conditions to be met is a chief translator with some kind of a team, which is qualified, adequate resources to support a translation, and an agreement with the translator. What we found in many instances is that a translation that began as a labor of love, or something that was out of the passion of a translator, ends up being something that Urantia Foundation chooses to support. And so consequently, we've been working with people to make sure that we have the resources available, both in terms of technical resources, but also in terms of the monetary resources that are necessary for an individual to spend 9 to 10 years of their life working on this translation. A translator team must overcome many obstacles to create a translation that is readable in the target language, faithful to the original text, uniform in the use of terminology, and free of register shifting. Readable in the readable in the language has become something we've kind of gone back and forth at. At first, there were many languages that were translated verbatim as this word translates to this. But what we were finding was syntax became very important. That actually sometimes when you have a word-to-word translation, somebody looks at it in another language and says, I can't read this. It doesn't make sense to me. And so what we've been really working hard at is that readability, still faithful, of course. We don't want any extra beings brought into the text, or, you know, maybe reincarnation, as Enrique would say, could enter a text. But what we do want is faithfulness, but definitely readability as well. We have a computer program now called Deja Vu, which is basically looking at the use of terminology and is it consistent across the text. We form a text base, or we form a term base. We can compare term bases across languages, which is really nice now, because in Spanish they may say midwear is something, and then in Portuguese they may say midwear is something else. And of course, then that helps the translator try to figure out, well, what is our best translation? But more than that, imagine translating this book without a computer aid. Imagine the times we see terms that are used forever and ever, and how difficult it is for an individual translator, just like it was for the celestial beings when they decided to, begin this process of bringing the text to our planet in English. And free of register shifting, that's been another piece. The Urantia book, our friend Mo Siegel, our president, keeps telling us it's written at the 14th college grade level. And so it's very easy sometimes to shift down registers, right? Because you know you're not talking to people who read at the 14th grade level. And so what we're looking for is to keep the register really consistent throughout the translation. And it's going to be up to all of us and to all of you all to be able to take those concepts that are relatively well translated and shift them into that lower register where people will be able to, who don't read or don't listen or don't whatever, will be able to understand them. So we kind of want to keep our translations at a similar register throughout. By the end of stage 2, it's determined that the seed is strong, the soil is rich, and the conditions right for growth. All is ready for the transformation of individuals and cultures that begin once the Spirit inspires. We begin stage 3 then with our translation process. During this stage, the translator team partners with Urantia Foundation to support the creation of a high-quality translation and prepare it to be published. Total dedication to this project is the hallmark of stage 3. It's pretty easy to lose focus, when you're 9-10 years in and you've still been working on it and it's still not perfect, because translators really do want it to be a perfect reflection of that English text. So it requires a person who's going to be willing to gain a deep understanding of the English text, which we hear is actually one of the great benefits of translating. You really have to understand what the English text says. Develop new words and a syntax to be expressive of ideas and concepts. And create a translation overall that is beautiful. And that beauty will be, what is it that's going to hit us and hit those people who come in contact with the book and will say, it's worth going forward. By the end of stage 3, the soil is rich, the roots have grown deep, and the leaves begin to flourish. The transformation of individuals and cultures is on its way. During stage 4, what we're looking at is the maturation. In this stage, it's published, it's distributed, and what becomes very, very important to us always in maturation is feedback. Feedback's shared, and the desire to create a translation of higher quality grows. And I think many of you who are in countries with relatively, translations that have been around a while can kind of hear that. We didn't quite get this right, or when I compare it to the English text, I don't really know what the translator meant. There's also the struggles between beauty and accuracy. It may be beautiful, but is it accurate to the text? And so with that stage, the maturing stage, which can go kind of all the way to 15 years, what we see is that it's going to take some time to gather that feedback, the rich feedback of people who are really trying to understand the text in a specific language. By the end of stage 4, the conditions are ripe for change. The soil needs more nutrients and resources to accelerate its growth. Changes in individuals and cultures necessitates language which is more faithful, readable, consistent, and clear. Stage 5, we revisit that. We continue in the revising. During this stage, the translation is revised, feedback has been received, and a team of dedicated readers has emerged. And that's our stage 5 kind of pinnacle. When we get a group of people who have been reading the book now seriously, and they're willing to take on the text and actually look to revise some of those issues and problems that maybe have happened at the beginning of a translation, which always happen. Terms are clarified, quality is improved, and the text is polished. And that's what we see in our revised texts. The texts who have gone through this process, French was probably one of our original texts. When was it published, you guys, in France? 1963, yeah?
French was 61, 62, Jacques Weiss.
Jacques Weiss.
A copy of it downstairs.
Yes. And it's actually been through what? Is it 3 revisions now? The last was yes, I would say 3 since the cosmology with the three versions. Yes, so right now it's been through 3 revisions, and you see each time I believe the readership is seeing greater clarity and greater polish and readability to that text. By the end of stage 5, the soil is replenished, the nutrients rich, and growth accelerated. Now it's time to reintegrate the enhanced language and clarity of thinking into the evolutionary channels of individuals and cultures, just waiting for this new truth. So, and as this revision matures, and this was a quote that actually I was quite surprised. I was looking for something totally different, and I ran across this, and I thought, this tells us exactly what we're doing right now. And I think it's worthy of conversation because this is the Cultural Symposium, and we are looking to this purpose. Maybe not to get hundreds of thousands of Urantia Book readers, but what we're looking to, the spread of civilization must wait upon language. Live and growing languages ensure the expansion of civilized thinking and planning. Today, there is a great need for further linguistic development to facilitate the expression of evolving thought. That's actually quite different from maybe what we think our job is in many ways. But it's so, I guess it's comforting to me to know that every time a translation comes out, every time we try to bring forward these words, God the Father, the concepts that are so clear and important in the Urantia book, that is facilitating the expression of evolving thought. And we've kind of lamented today in this symposium a bit about how it's so difficult to build these concepts, to think about things in terms of, oh, we've got many different religions, and you know, they may not read the Urantia book exactly like it is, but I think that linguistic development, if we can keep working on accomplishing that, what we're doing is kind of what the Urantia book's asking us to do, to bring forth linguistic development for the expression of evolving thought.